Hi, my name's Lauren, and if you've not seen my videos before, I like to talk about all things bookish, so book reviews, reading vlogs, all of that good stuff. And it has reached the time of year where we need to do a 2024 wrap up, which is just crazy because I've only been doing this since about October time, and yeah, I never thought I'd be making like bookish content and all of that good stuff. And then I discovered BookTok and it just went from there. So yeah, like this has only been going on since like September, October time, and now we are doing the 2024 wrap up, which is wild because this year has just been crazy for reading. I've always been a huge reader, always loved books, but this year has been something else. So there's lots to catch up on, lots to talk about. How many books I've read, plans for next year when it comes to reading, best and worst books of the month. It's all going to be in this video, so get comfy and let's talk about a year in reading. So in 2024, I think I initially set my reading goal at 40 books. That's sort of a number that is always quite, or has always been quite achievable for me in the last few years of reading. I always set a reading goal on Goodreads, but I'm not too like strict with it. I tend to set it a little bit lower because then I can up the number as I get close to it, and then it gets to a certain point in the year and I usually just stop upping it, and then like it becomes whatever I read after that is a bonus, a little extra. So I will be ending 2024 on 60 books, which is the highest amount of books that I have ever read. And I know there'll be some people out there that have read double and triple that. There'll be some people out there that might have only read 1 or 2 books, but it really doesn't matter. Like, we all read at different paces. It really does not matter how many books you read in a year, you are still a reader. But I have read 60 books, or I will have by the end of the year. I am currently on my 60th book, but I know that it will get finished by the end of this year. So yeah, it's been an absolutely incredible year for reading. As I said earlier, in September time, I sort of discovered BookTok, and I was like, do you know what? I think this is something I would like to do. So in September, I started making BookTok content, and then that very quickly snowballed and became a BookTube, a Bookstagram, and a blog, because I do not do things by halves. I have gone all in on the bookish content. If you do want to find any of my other bookish things, there are always links below in the description and like in the little bio thing. You can find all my other book things in there. But yeah, it's just wild how many books I have read this year and how back into reading I have got. As I said, I've always been a big reader. I've always loved books, loved reading right from being a very small child. I predominantly read on Kindle just because it's like a space thing. I don't have much space for physical books. However, since joining all of these bookish communities, the physical book pile has grown, and yeah, I do actually have some bookshelves now. I've got some bookshelves for Christmas. I am going to film like a big physical book haul of not just books I got for Christmas, but sort of physical books that I have acquired over the last month or so, because there's been quite a few. The bookshelves aren't huge, but as I said, it is a space thing. I don't have a massive amount of space for like a bookcase, even though that is the absolute dream. So my little shelves will have to do for now, but obviously it's far more than what I've previously had, so I'm very excited about it. And as I said, in a few weeks there will be like a big book haul coming of physical books that I have bought or have had bought for me over the last month, so keep an eye out for that. So yeah, I think what we will do is like a little rundown of like my favourite and my least favourite book of each month for 2024, and then we'll discuss a little bit of like reading goals and things like that for 2025. Right, I've got my list. I will just say that some of the books on the least favourite, like note I haven't said worst books of the month, the least favourite books weren't necessarily bad books. Some were, don't get me wrong, and I will talk about them more when we get to them, but some of them aren't bad books. It's just that I read some amazing books that month and they happen to be like my least favourite. Some of them I still highly recommend. It's just that they were in with a fantastic bunch of books that month, so have fallen into the category of being the least favourite. I haven't included any books that I DNF'd on the least favourites because I think it's just a given that if I've DNF'd it, it's not great. I'm really big on DNFing books. I know some people never DNF a book and that absolutely blows my mind, but I am really big on DNFing a book, so I couldn't even tell you how many books I have DNF'd this year. It's quite a large number, but life is too short to read bad books, and if you're not enjoying it, I don't see the point in putting yourself through it. So there are no DNF'd books on here. There are some bad books. There are some good books. We'll get into it. So, in January, my favourite book of the month was A Haunting in the Arctic by C.J. Cook. I tend to read like quite wintry, or try to read quite wintry novels in like January time, and this was perfect. This was my first ever C.J. Cook book, and I went on a little bit of a C.J. Cook journey this year, and yeah, Haunting in the Arctic was just fantastic. My least favourite book for January was Antarctica by Claire Keegan. From what I remember, this is a collection of short stories. It wasn't necessarily a bad book, but I have said before that short stories and like short story collections just don't really do much for me. This was fine, it just wasn't the best. In February, I've cheated slightly because I have two favourites, but they were both like part of the same series. It's just a 2-book series, and I couldn't really pick between them because they were both fantastic, and they're books that I don't get seen like talked about anywhere. It's Wranglestone and Timberdark by Darren Charlton, and these were absolutely fantastic books. I read them like back to back, so I finished Wranglestone, went straight on to Timberdark, and yeah, they were absolutely amazing. I don't know, it's like a gay romance but young adult, and it's just fantastic. Like, it's such a good take on the like end of the world, zombies, apocalypse sort of genre. It's like just a really refreshing take on it, and they were brilliant. So I couldn't pick between them both, so they both went on there as my favourites. And then my least favourite book for February was The Nesting by C.J. Cook. Now, this was not a bad book at all. Obviously, I've already mentioned C.J. Cook. Absolutely love her books. They are fantastic. Highly recommend The Nesting. But when they were pitted against the Wranglestone and Timberdark series, it had to go as my least favourite. I'm pretty sure I only read those 3 books that month, which is why it's landed like that. But yeah, just because it's on the least favourite list, I still highly recommend it. I just thought Timberdark and Wranglestone were better. For March, this is a tricky month because I only read 1 book in March. I read some non-fiction, and non-fiction takes me a very long time. Like, I want to like non-fiction, but I'm really not sure if it is for me, just because of the sheer amount of time it takes me to read a book, and it took me the entire month to read this. So I don't have a worst book of the month for March, because I actually did really enjoy the book I read, and it was Pull to Pull by Michael Palin. It was an absolutely fantastic book. I really enjoyed it, but it just did take me a very long time to read. So it is my best book of the month because it was the only book, and yeah, no complaints about it. It just takes me a very long time to read non-fiction. In April, my best book was The Gathering by C.J. Tudor. C.J. Tudor is one of my all-time favourite authors. I just love anything and everything that she writes. If you've never read a C.J. Tudor book, do yourselves a favour and go and read one, because they are just fantastic, and I loved The Gathering. It was quite different to anything that she'd done before, but I thought it was great. It's like a vampire genre novel, and it's perfection. Like, I got to the end of it and I just wanted to go back and start again from the beginning and experience it all again. It was that good. Then my worst book in April, I feel really bad for what's made it on here, but at the start of the like the first half of the year, I didn't actually read that many books each month, which is why this has happened. But it's another CJ Cook book, and it's The Lighthouse Witches. Again, not a bad book by any stretch of the imagination. I think I ended up giving it a 4-star rating. I highly recommend it. But again, when it went up against the other books that I read that month, and it went up against The Gathering, it had to go on my least favourite, but not a bad book at all. Do recommend it. And I feel really bad that CJ Cook's ended up on this list twice now for least favourite book of the month. It's just, it was up against some tough competition. May was not a good reading month. There is no best book of the month because, again, I only read one book, and it's probably up there with one of my least favourite books of the year. So yeah, this landed on the least favourite, but this is a book that I found particularly bad, and it's a book that loads of people love. And yeah, it's The Reformatory. I couldn't get on board with it at all. It's a very long book, and I just really did not understand the hype around it. It's a book I wish I'd DNF'd. Like, I wasted an entire month reading this book, and I could have got like 3-4 good books in that time. I just didn't enjoy it. I don't know why I carried on reading it. I think I carried on reading it because of how much praise and how much like positive hype there is around it, but it wasn't for me at all. Did not enjoy the reading experience, did not enjoy the book, and highly regret not DNFing it. In June, I had quite a good reading month in June. I went on holiday and I got a lot of books read, but my best book for June was Go As a River by Shelley Reid. This is such a beautiful book. If you are a fan of Where the Crawdads Sing, go and read Go As a River, because it's a similar sort of feel to it. It's just a fantastic book. Like, I don't see Go As a River spoken about as much as Where the Crawdads Sing, and everyone needs to know about Go As a River because it's so good. In June, my least favourite book was Diddly Squat Till the Cows Come Home by Jeremy Clarkson. I really like the Jeremy Clarkson farm books. I love the show anyway. Not a bad book at all. It was just a great, quick, light-hearted, fun read that perfectly accompanied the show. I think that's the second book. Absolutely loved it, but again, it was up against some really, really strong contenders that month, so it's ended up as the least favourite. In July, I went back to non-fiction, despite what I said earlier, and in all fairness, I read 3 non-fiction books back to back because they were all part of the same series. And yeah, overall, it will become more clear in a minute, overall the series was very good. So my favourite book for July was The Salt Path by Raina Wynn. It's an absolutely amazing story of homelessness and like the battles that people go through, and a look at illness and accepting the decline of a loved one. Like, there are so many topics in it, but it just tackles like the theme of homelessness in a way that's never been done before, I guess because not very many people tackle homelessness the way that Raina and her husband did. It's absolutely fascinating. I loved The Salt Path. For someone that doesn't tend to get on with non-fiction that well, I flew through The Salt Path and loved it. But on the flip side of that, my least favourite book for July was The Wild Silence, also by Raina Wynn. It's the second book in the trilogy. I did not enjoy The Wild Silence. I feel like if you're going to read all 3 books, you've sort of got to read The Wild Silence, but it feels a little bit unnecessary. It was quite the come down after reading The Salt Path, and like the whole tone and the whole vibe of The Wild Silence felt completely different to The Salt Path. It wasn't great, but I had to read it because it was part of the trilogy. In August, my favourite book was How to Age Disgracefully by Claire Pooley. I quite enjoyed Claire Pooley books. and I read 2 that month, but it's Out of Age Disgracefully that landed as my best book because it was just so funny, so heartwarming, absolutely amazing characters that you fall in love with. Like, Claire Pooley books are just the best sort of summer read. They're great. And then my worst book for, not worst, my least favourite book for August was The Push by Ashley Audrain. Again, not a bad book. I just don't think I was the right target audience for it. It was good. It was really like suspenseful. It had a very creepy child in it. But I feel like mothers would probably get more and be more creeped out and more moved by the book than someone like me who doesn't have children and who doesn't want children. But yeah, a great like thriller, but perhaps I wasn't the right audience for it. In September, and again, right, this is where my reading really picked up. Like, you'll see the correlation between me starting like BookTok and BookTube and my reading really picking up. So in September, my favourite book was Brother by Anaya Allborn, and this is just such a fantastic book. I'm pretty sure I've got a full review on this, so I will link the full review to Brother below. But honestly, it is fantastic, and up until very, very recently, this was a contender for my favourite book of the year, but it has been knocked off the top spot now. But it's a very close second. It's not a happy book by any stretch of the imagination. It's quite dark, quite sad, but it is fantastic. Just go and watch my full review for like a full breakdown on it. It's great. Then for September, my least favourite book was House of Shivers, which is a Goosebumps book, so it's by R.L. Stine. I do quite like to read Goosebumps books at that time of year, just as a little bit of a palate cleanser. This one wasn't great. It's from a different like series to the original Goosebumps books, and yeah, it wasn't the best. It did its job. It was a little filler, little palate cleanser, but yeah, not the best. In October, if you've watched my other videos, this one will come as no surprise, because my favourite book in October was The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore, and I have a full review for The Pumpkin Spice Cafe, so I will leave that below. I don't even need to discuss it anymore because I have talked about the Dream Harbour series quite a lot on this channel. I've done reading vlogs for some of the books, so yeah, loved it. In October, I've had to go with 2 books for my least favourite, and I think they're up there with actually my worst books of the year. So the first one was Gone to See the Riverman. This just confused the hell out of me. I actually didn't even give this book a star rating. Not necessarily because it deserved 0 stars, just because it was bizarre. It was really bizarre. It's got a lot of taboo subjects in it, I will say that. It's definitely like veering on the extreme horror side of things. But the whole Riverman storyline is just weird, and I just did not get it. And then the other pick for October, much in the same vein of being weird, is How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. And I know some people absolutely love Grady Hendrix books, but I've come to the firm conclusion that his writing style is just not for me. I could not get on board with that at all. Like, I know it was supposed to be humorous in parts, but it just felt really silly. And like the humour didn't quite hit and the horror didn't quite hit, and it just ended up feeling like a bit of a mess, and it was far too long. In November, this is the book that has took the top spot for my favourite book of the year, and it is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. But on the flip side of things, my least favourite book for November was Somewhere Beyond the Sea by TJ Klune, the second book to The House in the Cerulean Sea. I've done a whole video on this. I've done a whole video about the Cerulean Chronicles because never has a sequel disappointed me as much as what Somewhere Beyond the Sea did. So The House in the Cerulean Sea is my favourite book of the year. I would go as far as to say it's the best book that I have read in quite a few years now, but its sequel does not need to exist in my opinion. And then that brings us on to the last month of the year, and my favourite book for December was Can I Tell You Something? This was festive filth at its finest. It was cute, it had a great setting, it had quite a good storyline, and the spice in this was just pure perfection. It's such a good book. Do yourselves a favour and just read it. And then my least favourite book for December is one that's perhaps my most disappointing book of the year, because it's The Christmas Tree Farm by Laurie Gilmore. And I did a full reading vlog on this, so you can see my disappointment playing out in real time if you want to go and watch the reading vlog. I'll leave a link below. But it just did not hit in the same way as the first two Dream Harbour books did. Yeah, it's... the less said about my experience of reading The Christmas Tree Farm, the better. But you can watch it on the reading vlog. So they were my best and my least favourite books for the whole of 2024. Like, some absolutely amazing books on that list, and some bitter disappointments. In 2025, I actually think I'm going to set my reading goal quite low to start with. I think I'm going in with 20 books to start with, because I am entering my fantasy era in 2025. Like, I am going there with the fantasy books. I never thought I would read fantasy books, and then BookTok came along and altered my brain chemistry, and now I want to read loads of fantasy. But we all know that some fantasy books are chunky. Like, there's a lot to digest in there. And not that I've rushed my way through books in 2024, but I do definitely acknowledge that, especially when I joined like these bookish communities, I found myself sometimes not fully absorbing what I was reading, for the sake of like saying, oh yeah, I read 10 books this month. So in 2025, I just really want to like slow down my reading, fully immerse myself in a book. And yet there's a lot to digest with fantasy books. I have never read like any high fantasy before. Dipped my toes in with cozy fantasy a little bit in 2024, but yeah, I've not really gone there with the like heavy high fantasy maps and world building. But that is the plan for 2025, so I've set the goal low and we will see how my fantasy journey goes. I'm sure there'll be lots of reading vlogs, because I think they're like my favourite thing to film. I really like deep diving into books, and I like giving my opinions on books as I go along, rather than having read the entire thing and then sitting down and trying to do a review. I like the more raw and honest reactions as I go along, and I feel like that's going to be something that's really good to do with a lot of these fantasy books, and especially because I am not a fantasy reader. So yeah, 2025 reading vlogs are on the cards, fantasy is on the cards, slowing down, taking my time, immersing myself in books is also on the cards. And that's about it, because I don't like to set like TBRs. I'm very much a mood reader, so I wouldn't stick to it anyway. But yeah, we'll see where 2025 takes us and what sort of books I end up reading. Do let me know what your best and worst book of 2024 was. Let me know any books that you're really looking forward to reading in 2025, and I will see you guys next time.